almost there. This is slice number 7. I hope everyone out there is having an amazing Thanksgiving. And this is going to come out after Thanksgiving, so I hope you had an amazing time. Did all the good things. Hopefully got a chance to listen to some great music and see people you care about, you miss. Wasn't too much family drama or whatever. So, okay. Record number 7 for our, this is Blood Ceremony, self-titled, 2008, on Rise Above Records. And this is kind of like in terms of a continuation of what we can talk about, or I can talk about, I should say, in terms of records that kind of opened doors for me. So I don't think people would list this band as a what do you want to call it? A doorman's, whatever. Just because it's so far, like, it's so clearly pulling from the 1970s that while you could potentially use that kind of term, all the negative associations that go along with it, I don't think it's really necessarily guilty of, because there's probably more subtext to that term than is explicitly stated. And this record, I mean, from the beginning, it comes in with this organ, and it's very much like organ. You think Uriah Heep, but like Jethro Tull, pulling from a part of Sabbath that was. It should be pretty obvious in terms of influences. I'll pull up the vinyl here. It's kind of a cool variant. It's like you won't probably be able to tell, but it's like a rippled and gold flake vinyl. I don't know if that'll show clearly. You kind of need like some light pouring back, and God knows my audio and lighting here is nothing special. But anyway, it's a pretty cool variant. Because it's just not that like gold. Initially when I pulled it out and took a look at it, I thought there was dust that accumulated on the record, but I looked closer and I realized just sort of gold flakes that are poured into the vinyl. So pretty cool. But where was I? Okay, so Uriah Heep, Jethro Tull. There's a flute here, so that's kind of in the same way that an organ would be immediately associated with something like Uriah Heep. A flute, you think Jethro Tull off the top of your head, and then Sabbath, Pagan Altar, I think is another one, or Witchfinder General. Like, they do a really good job, and it probably has to do with where a record sort of appears in time to have such a clear and well-defined sort of theme or trope. And what I mean by that is, like, you listen to those, especially something like Jethro Tull, but you listen to, like, even Sabbath, right? And to some degree, Pagan Altar, Witchfinder General, like, they're so much closer to the sort of blues to rock transition with early metal, that some of the songs, on their albums kind of sound like, are just very different than the ones that metalheads will hold up as, like, true to form. That is an absolute metal song, or that is a pioneering, important metal song. But then they'll have sort of like shortcomings on their records where people will kind of like, oh, that one's too hippie-ish for me, or I don't know what other way to say that, but it's like kind of got this good times, wandering children of the woods I don't know where I'm going with this, but if you've listened to those records, you know what I mean. Like the flower children of the '60s, right? Like, as much as they are sort of heavy rock or darker prog rock from their era, they're also sort of, in terms of culturally inhabiting a space, there people are also listening to the Doors and the Beatles and whatever. So the reason I say that is in 2008, it's like extreme metal has had their heyday, right? Like, we had the extreme metal of the 90s. You know, people have been murdered, churches have been burned, there's, you know, people mutilated on album covers, and in the sense that, like, so much Satanism and explicit occult, whatever, blasphemous material has been released, like, to pull from all of that artistic material and concentrate that kind of occult presentation within a 70s Doom release, this just feels distilled. Like, they took what was an incredibly ripe space to take influences with occult, you know, material, and they can discard all the flower power stuff. So sonically, it's very much rooted in the 70s, but the themes, the lyrical content, you know, even the album cover here, like, you clearly know what's going on, is they're taking all of the sort of satanic elements that were hinted or that were still being worked out in the 1970s, and whatever, 40 years later, they have a record that has so much more clarity in terms of presentation and identity, while at the same time, you know, musically having no problems incorporating those influences. The place for me, like, similar to that Paul Bearer record, it was just so left field in 2008 for me that to even say that like I would necessarily group it in with a lot of my metal listening would be, you know, maybe a bridge too far, but it also, like, was breaking down barriers, and I think that's important because I didn't have the same sort of relationship to, like, let's say, you know, Black Sabbath, you know, Masters of Reality. You know, that was very much like I have a relationship to that record that is purely based on, like, trying to educate myself and to some degree, like, historical context and, you know, giving you foundational influence, you know, because Master of Reality is that good. But it didn't feel like it was my band. I feel like you pull that off and you sort of try and reimagine what it was like to listen to that record, you know, so many decades ago. Because my friends and I would often talk, and, you know, we'd listen to that record and be like, can you imagine what it must have felt like to listen to Black Sabbath, you know, at the very beginning? How just crazy that must have been. But when I come and listen to Blood Ceremony, it's like, okay, here's a band that's clearly playing in that space, but, you know, it's a new band in 2008. This is their first full length, and, you know, I feel very much like I'm in their crosshairs. Like, these are younger musicians that want to play this kind of doom metal, and the fact that they were kind of speaking to me, I didn't know at the time, but, like, similar to the same sort of things I mentioned with the Paul Bearer record, like, it was pulling down a lot of the barriers and preconceived notions I had about the genre and how I would relate to it in the future. So, because now I love doom metal, and I don't hear tons of bands in this style, but it just was so out of the norm, and I was completely out of my element that it just tore through all the different, sort of segues or incremental steps you would take to get there, it just catapulted me back to the 1970s. And as I started to put together the pieces of like what Doom was in the 1990s and the 1980s, before I got to the 1970s, it kind of, I started from a record like this and kind of worked my way back, knowing what my end goal would be. So in that regard, like you move from something like this and you start listening to Reverend Bizarre, and you start listening to Cathedral, and you start listening to St. Vitus, and I was like, oh yeah, here's like the decades of Doom that have gone past and are worthy of my attention. So anyway, that's my blood ceremony story there. Your little artwork in there for you. 2008, self-titled, Rise Above Records. We did it. Okay, that's 7. Just one more to go. Thank you so much for sticking here with me. I completely, at this point, I'm so close to the end. We're gonna do this. All right, I'll see you guys later. Bye.